Hi, Vince here with another of my bike stories. This one of buying a 500cc 750 bike because of a gauge cluster, taking it on international adventures, parking it in the side of a car, honing my flying skills and drag race practice on a motorway. I can sense you are hovering over that subscribe button already. Well, get on with it. And for my part, I'll tell you the tale. Those regular watchers of my bike stories will both by now know that I started with a small Yamaha trail bike before graduating to a rather uninspiring Honda CB200. The links to these videos can be seen in my video description. The choice of these bikes was helpfully determined by outside influences, so my next upgrade had to be on my own choice. I decided on a Kawasaki 750cc inline 4 bike. However, the external influence raised its profile once more and I bought a V-twin 500cc Honda. Something to do with my father only having a 360cc bike at the time and about to change it for a 650, methinks. Maybe that's a bit unfair. Maybe. Although my shiny new second-hand Honda CX500 wasn't a Kawasaki, nor encompassed a 750cc sized engine, had many redeeming features. Firstly, it was as imposing as the 750cc models of the era. This provided the stability and comfort that bigger bikes gave. Secondly, Hondas were generally considered better built and more reliable than products from the Big Z. And thirdly, well mainly really, I settled on it because it had a dashboard. Yes, I agreed to the choice on the grounds that there were lights in between the speedo and tachometer. Sad really, and that's the point you would add a like for this video. The other exciting addition to this on-bike dashboard was a temperature gauge, because the bike had a water-cooled engine. And believe me, in those days, that was cutting edge. Only the Suzuki GT750 Kettle could boast this technology, but that bike was styled in the dark and drank fuel like a whale filters plankton. So I ended up with a 1978 red S registration maggot, for that's how I later understood that they were known. The name wasn't unjustified either, as the bulky water-encased engine resided under a substantial spreading fuel tank and an enormous padded double seat. Everything seemed styled for a much bigger bike, and I had suspected that Honda had plans for a 750cc version. In fact, later incarnations took the size first to 650, then added turbos, so my suspicions were right. The CX500 also took the mantle of Tourer for those who didn't want or couldn't afford the magnificent 1000cc flagship Honda Gold Wing. As it happened in silly laid-back style, the CX500 later became the Silver Wing. My version was the bog standard CX, a purring water-cooled V-twin. It was only a couple of years old, in fantastic condition. It became a weekend plaything, a tourer, and then a reliable commuter, and fulfilled all roles well. I first used the maggot as a weekend plaything because I worked too close to my home to warrant using it much for going to work. In the near half-mile journey, I had barely time to close off the choke and before arriving at my destination. And in winter actually spent more time warming the engine than riding to work. So the Honda was used for getting to the disco at weekends. Hey, it was the early 80s. The sheer bulk always made an impression and warranted due care when reversing off pavements. Once I went too slow and got to the point where foot doesn't touch ground, then side of bike does. It also increased my radius of exploration exponentially over the previous CB200 I had. So the Cotswolds and Wales became my hunting ground from the south coast. Funnily enough, I don't ever recall going to the Midlands or towards Norfolk. Can't think why. Inevitably, I wanted to travel further and my mates and I discussed a round Britain tour using all the coastal routes. This never came to pass, but I still think it would be an adventure and still plan to do this journey someday. A few of us did settle on a tour into France. The evocative, exotic, topless French women of Saint-Tropez were the incentive, so 4 of us planned to go. As is usual in these cases, circumstances changed and 2 of my friends, Jeff and John, taking advantage of their break from A-level schooling, went ahead early and ended up settling on an island midway down the French west coast for the rest of the summer. Spike and I had jobs, me full-time and Spike as a paperboy or something, so we intended to follow later on. The journey down through France was not as fun as it might be today. We had never travelled abroad and the only preparations we made were painting our headlights yellow and buying a map. The map was poor and we got lost leaving Calais. The French weather was burning hot and Spike, who had just purchased my father's Honda CB360 Yellow Banana, was obsessed with his motor overheating, so insisted travelling everywhere around at no more than 40 to 50 mile an hour. At these speeds, the air cooling effect must have been abysmal on his air-cooled engine, as it was hardly effective on my CX500's radiator. However, being the one with the temperature gauge staring right in my face made me the one worrying about it. It set a poor tone for the holiday and resulted in a niggling disagreement halfway down France. In essence, Spike wanted to join Jeff and John and, quote, start pulling birds. And I wanted to motor on down to Saint-Tropez, where I argued the real action was. Spike won out by refusing to leave the camp we had arrived at. My topless French woman dream was destroyed. Our mid-sized bikes actually proved popular in France, so Spike and I did make temporary friendships. And no, I do not know the contact details of the hunk on the right. We never even met up with the others, and from what I heard later, that decision could have saved Jeff and John's friendship. But that's another story for them to tell. Another memorable long journey made on the Maggot was into Wales. I'd met a new girlfriend, Inger, who had never been on a motorbike before, so we both looked forward to our trip. She had no more idea than me that we were to undertake a 400-mile 6-hour ride, and it showed how versatile the big Honda was. In fact, testament to the comfort of the seat, there was no complaint for either of us. The amusing fact with Inger was that as she hadn't ridden pillion before, I asked that she leave the steering to me and remain upright at all times. I meant perpendicular to the bike, but she interpreted as bolt upright. Every time I leant into a bend, she twisted her torso to remain upright. I thought it hilarious. She was hardly big enough to destabilise the beast below, so I let her carry on. I didn't tell her until we reached the Severn Bridge. And for that, Inger, I apologise. Mind you, I cannot recall going out with her for long, but that's not so much because of my riding. More to do with the fact that I fell for her friend Fiona. Excuse me for one moment while I recall Fiona. Thanks. Fiona, unfortunately, didn't have the inclination to get on my bike. It wasn't because she only had eyes for Suzukis or anything. It's just that some people just don't seem to get the biking thing. Mainly because of the sort of event that happened next on it. A car pulled out on me at a junction. It was midday and I was taking a well-earned lunch break. Although I'd crossed half of Southampton, I only had a faint purpose in mind, so in no particular hurry. The sun was out and the roads in those days still clear enough in places to enjoy a midday ride. I was travelling towards Portswood, doing no more than a few miles an hour above the limit, when I noticed a car waiting to pull out to my left. I was on a main road, so took little more care than any other 200 or so occupied junctions that I'd passed that week. The driver, however, didn't want to follow the crowd, opted for not seeing me at all, and pulled out across my path. Naturally, I braked. Very hard. The car in question was a Citroën Diane, a sort of hardly upmarket 2CV. The driver, fool enough to pull out in the path of a huge red bike, added to his stupidity by stopping as soon as he saw me. Little tip, why not consider going next time? If instead of abruptly stopping it had accelerated with all the pull his pathetic vehicle could manage, I could have steered behind. As it was, he stopped slap bang in front of me across the whole road, frozen in panic. There were no steerable soft options, so I braced myself for impact. Bearing in mind, this all happened in just a fraction of a second. Now, a fact known only to the experienced biker and to local accident and emergency departments is that many frontal motorcycle crashes result in damage to the biker's lower legs, because when a bike hits a stationary object, the rider slides forward on his derriere and imprints his knees into his own handlebars and then into the stationary car that caused the impact. Therefore, in any bike accident, once it is inevitable, the golden rule is to get well clear of all metalwork. In the case of T-boning a car, that means heading straight on over the top. I slowed as much as I could, leaving an impressive black streak of rubber, and picked my point of impact. My heart wanted to hit the git square in his door, but my head rolled that the bonnet would be a lower hurdle to cross. The bike itself wedged behind the car's front wheels. I raised up my torso and took up flying. I cannot recall the flight, but do remember the landing. Sliding down the road, my episode with the Gilera moped came to mind. But this time I reacted differently. I quickly stood up. Unfortunately, I did this too soon and went flying once more. It seemed my shoes were not designed for 30 miles an hour, and their destruction was testament to this. Thankfully, Other than the two now intertwined vehicles and my crash helmet, my shoes were the only casualty. My helmet was a write-off because they always are in these situations. Ostensibly, there seemed no damage to it other than a couple of round spots worn off the orange and green stripes of the forehead. But the car had a matching coloured 2-foot long parallel stripe on the bonnet. This is proof that helmets save lives and why I didn't need the ambulance as some witness called. I went back to inspect the damage. Such a long walk. Despite the fact I just invented unpowered flight, I was in a better state than the driver, still sat quivering in his car. An old man. I doubt that he drove again. In fact, his next trip was in the ambulance for someone had summoned for me, for a shock-induced cup of tea. His car certainly didn't drive again. My CX was parked bolt upright 3 feet into it. Annoyingly, the local motorcycle recovery specialist had just purchased a frame rejigger and wanted to justify its purchase, so decided to bend, coerce and wrangle the bike back into shape. It was just a few pounds short of a write-off, and I was too inexperienced to insist on it to the tight-fisted insurance company. I didn't even get compensation for my high-speed shoes and probably damaged helmet. So in effect, the maggot wrote off the car and lived. After the impact, the main replacement items were the forks, naturally. Not that they needed a Citroën Diane to make them flex. They were the weak point of the bike and were clearly not designed for the 2-ton weight. Occasionally I would lean over the handlebars and look down the shaft of the forks whilst braking, just to amusingly watch them bend back towards the radiator. Other than that, I couldn't fault the Honda. It chugged along effortlessly at any speed I chose to travel and for any number of miles. Reliability was excellent and fuel consumption acceptable for the size. It was big and red and comfortable. The V-twin throb was unusual. The modern era of popular twins hadn't yet started. I fitted an aftermarket stainless steel exhaust like I did to my CB200. It sounded good. It worked in rain and shine and then more rain, mile after mile, with little attention other than basic servicing. Even the shaft final drive kept the back end from looking like a freshly hit oil field. All this reliability came in handy because for the final few months it became the archetypal commuter as it took me into the New Forest day after day in pursuit of my new girlfriend Karen. Those late night return trips along an empty motorway allowed me to test its standing start quarter mile abilities. Can you imagine finding any time day of night nowadays when you could stop in the centre lane of a major motorway for a standing start drag race? Mind you, today's 500cc bikes, although water-cooled, would now pull wheelies under such conditions. The heavy CX kept its front wheel firmly rooted to the ground. Things were getting dirtier for me as attention moved from wheels to girls. I mean, of course, I didn't give it such a thorough cleaning quite so often. The bike! The bike! It was eventually sold when I realised the Fionas started outnumbering the Ingers, so I really had to get a car. I did a poor deal that involved swapping it for a Hillman that eventually got swapped for a bicycle that then got nicked. It was a sad end to a good motorbike, particularly as DVLA records show no re-registration after I sold it in 1981. It became untaxed a year later, meaning it only lived a life for 4 years and 7 months. I wonder, was it stripped for parts or was it still in one piece, somewhere in a barn, or maybe purring around a big field enjoying a leisurely retirement? But the key question is, would I have it back? With that repaired frame? No way, other than for sentimental reasons, parked up in a garage. Thank you for listening to my Honda CX500 tale, particularly if you've made it through this far without bumping into a French car. Remember to subscribe if you haven't and to like this video. And if you want to add your thoughts on maggots in the comments, I'll do my very best to respond. Meanwhile, on to my next. Bye for now.